I'm really happy to be here. A lot of serendipity took place in order for me to be here with you today. So my initial introduction to Go-Kart Labs was through Adam Dole, who's been a longtime friend and colleague of mine for almost a decade. So thank you, Adam, for introducing me to everybody here. And when I say serendipity, one of my roles at my current company, Tandem Diabetes Care, we make technology for people with insulin-dependent diabetes. And one of the things I do is I oversee our human factors team. So if you work at an FDA-regulated company, you know that you have to do lots of testing, human factors testing, in order to get clearance from the FDA. And so my human factors team is here in Minnesota this week, doing a whole bunch of testing on the products that are in our pipeline. So when I got the call from Adam and Amy, they said September 12th in Minneapolis. I was like, wait a second, September 12th in Minneapolis? They're like, yeah. I'm like, I'm already going to be there. So it worked out really nicely. I live in San Diego, and I very much enjoy coming to Minnesota, even in the winter. But I am happy it's the summer. And when I landed and was taking the car ride from the airport, I texted my husband and I said, it's so green here. You can smell the oxygen in the air. It just made me so happy, which is very different than where I live. Where I live is desert, right by the ocean, but desert nonetheless. So as mentioned, I am a behavioral psychologist. In industry, we call people like me behavioral scientists. Call us what you want. We're people who specialize in social sciences. And what I like to say at a cocktail party is I specialize in and advocate for the humans using our machines. So whether we talk about a medical device that's life-saving or any other piece of technology, even right down to your smartphone, there's an interaction that's taking place. You are a human using a machine. And that human-computer interaction, I specialize in the H part of that equation, right? So while today I've heard a lot of people, and I regularly hear a lot of people say the technology part is easy, I don't think so. I'm in awe of the engineers and the designers and all the people that build and make technology a reality. I think it's mind-blowing, and thank you to everybody who does that. Humans, that's the easy part, and I promise I'm going to make you feel that way by the time we finish this conversation. Yeah, we're messy, yeah, we're complicated, yeah, we're unpredictable, but it's the fun, easy part of all of this stuff, okay? So I think the opportunity that I have here with the time that we have together is to have an interactive discussion about you. We've talked a lot about processes, we've talked a lot about frameworks, we've talked a lot about outcomes and strategy and all that stuff, and that's fantastic. But what I want to talk about is you. So that's the invitation I'm issuing to you, is let's spend the time that we have together focusing on you. So don't worry so much about what you do for work or what your role is at your company or anything like that. You're a human. We're going to just go that simple, okay? But the lens we're going to take is, how can you as a person navigate your company or your work life as if you were a startup founder? Think that's possible? Raise your hand if you think it's possible. Raise your hand if you don't think it's possible. Okay. We had a whole bunch of non-voters too. That's okay. It's kind of like our country. Wish more people would vote. A whole different soapbox. Okay. I would like to say that I think it's possible. I think that what we can do in the next 30 minutes that we have together is arm you so that when you walk out of this room, you can do one thing to navigate your work life like a startup founder, okay? That's what we're going to talk about. So I've been in healthcare my entire career, practicing in both academia and industry. So the way that I've done my career for the last 20, 25 years is I spend half of my time in academia and half of my time in industry. I'm from the East Coast originally. I was at Columbia, then I moved to California, and I was at Stanford, and now I have a position at UCSD. I also have a full-time job at Tandem, as I mentioned, so the reason that I've set my career and my professional path up that way is because I like to practice the research and experimentation and scientific rigor that you have to if you're in academia, and then I like to figure out how to translate that to the real world. And then what we try in industry, I like to take that back to the lab at the university, and I really like that bi-directional relationship. Keeps me fresh, forces me to grow, gives me opportunities to take big risks. But I'm not going to talk about really rigorous academic things today, because that's not useful. We can talk about that later if you want to, but today I'm going to talk about stuff from my field that is immediately actionable and applicable. So I don't know if anybody saw this, but last month in Psychology Today, which is a mainstream publication, in Psychology Today, I'm sorry, let me back up. Yeah, in Psychology Today, there was an article that quoted this Harvard Business Review study. I don't know if anybody of you saw this, but it was basically saying that culture, the culture at your company, is the #1 reason innovation doesn't happen. So the culture at large companies is typically built on a foundation of operational excellence and predictable growth. That's your job. Change makers trying to conduct experiments are rarely greeted with open arms, especially when they're working on an idea that may cannibalize stable businesses or append today's distribution model. Sound familiar? It's one of the reasons what they do at Go-Kart is really exciting, right? Because there's no reason why a successful executive at a corporate company should take risks like a startup founder. A startup founder doesn't have to worry about profit for quite some time. If you're an executive at a corporation, you have to live and breathe by the bottom line. Those are two totally different incentives. Those are two totally different contexts, right? So I thought this was really interesting because the author of this article was talking about how it's the culture. The culture is the problem. Now, I was sitting there thinking about operational excellence and predictable growth and the fact that culture is the thing keeping these things in place and the reason we can't innovate like startup founders at large companies. And I thought to myself, okay, well, what do I do with that? Yeah, okay, so what? Like, really? Good to know, but what does that mean for me? What does that mean for you all? And the author offered up his suggestions for what we as executives at corporations could do. And what he said is, we have to allow for the empowerment of purpose. Anybody want to guess what that means? I'm serious, I actually don't know what that means. Seriously, I'm all ears. I would like to learn right now. We have to allow for the empowerment of purpose. Sounds good. Again, what does that mean? How do I do that? So he went one step further, and he said, here's how you do it. You have to expand the focus from profit to include purpose. You have to dismantle hierarchies and craft networks. You have to limit control and drive empowerment, and you have to stop planning and start experimenting. What? What am I, She-Ra? What am I, He-Man? Dismantle hierarchies? Why would you, a successful executive who makes a good living and has worked hard to get there and has people in your life depending on you, why would you do that? Maybe you're in the mood to take a risk one day, okay. But what? I actually know the author of this article, and I sent him a text. I was like, what kind of superhero pill did you take that morning? Great article, very inspirational, but what? Like, what are we supposed to do with this information? And I find that a lot of times when I read what's out there about innovating at large companies and doing what Go-Kart helps its companies do, if you're one person, if you're one leader at a company, what the hell are you supposed to do? And the stuff that's out there is great. It's energizing and it's inspirational, but there's not a lot of how-to. Even the frameworks like the 3-block solution, which I love. I think that's fantastic. I learned about that today. That's my new thing today. I'm taking it back to my company. I think it's fabulous. Even that, frameworks, they're great, but again, you're one person, okay? So we're gonna focus on you because you're one person. And if you are She-Ra or He-Man, please come talk to me after because big fan, big fan. So how do we do this? Because we've heard that transformation is hard. We've heard that adaptation is hard. We've heard that change is hard. And I'm going to challenge that and say, it's not. No. What's hard is figuring out where and how to start. It's just building your starting line. That's hard. Because there are things that you need to put in place to create your start point. If you can start, we can do the rest. We can do this, okay? But we already heard MJ said this in his talk too, like you have to start small. If you start big, then it's hard. If you start big, change is hard. But if you start small, we can do this. Okay, so when I left New York to go to San Francisco, I started working in a lab at Stanford, and one of my mentors was a guy named BJ Fogg. Has anybody heard of BJ Fogg? Raise your hand if you have. Great. Has anybody been to his boot camp? Okay. So he's an experimental psychologist at Stanford who runs a behavior design lab, and he specializes in how do we design for behavior change. And he says something that I think is a really nice way to think about change or behavior change. It's a really easy way to talk about it. You can change behavior in one of three ways, and these are the only three ways you can change human behavior. You can have an epiphany, and if anybody knows how to design epiphanies, again, please come find me later. You'd be very rich. You can change your environment. If anybody's ever redesigned their living room or their office or their kitchen or even the way you set up the food that's in your refrigerator, that can have a pretty big impact on your behavior and your eating behavior. Or the third way is you can take baby steps, okay? Now, I am not an interior designer and I'm not an epiphany magician, although I wish I was. So this is what we're gonna do today. If you want to talk about how to make change and if you want to talk about transformation as a professional, we need to talk about this strategy of taking baby steps, of starting really small, okay? So, and again, I think the value in this conversation is how do we start? How should we start? So, BJ has a framework called the Fogg Behavior Model. For those of you who know him or know his work, you've read about it or you've heard about it. All of what I'm about to share is readily available on the internet. You can go find it and read up about it as much as you want. But he basically says that a behavior happens when three things converge at the exact same moment in time. So a behavior happens when three things converge in the same moment in time. You have to have enough motivation to do the behavior, so that's drive to action, right? You have to have the energy to do it. You have to be able to, right? You have to have the ability, you have to be enabled to do it, and something has to trigger you to do it. If one of those three things isn't happening at that same moment, the behavior's not gonna happen. So we are gonna actually see this in real life. I need everybody to take a Post-it, a pad of Post-its, and make sure you have a pen. So you just need a pad. Hopefully there's enough for one pad in front of each person. Okay. All right. So the conversation right now is about behavior. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of one person in your life, your spouse, your boss, your kid, your best friend, whoever. Choose one person in your life. And if you could wave a magic wand to get that person to do one thing, what would it be? And I want you to write it down on the Post-it. You're not going to share. I'm not going to ask anybody to share. So go crazy. If you could wave a magic wand and one person in your life could do one thing, what would that one thing be? Actually, I changed my mind. I am going to ask a couple people to share. Who wants to share? Anybody? Yep.
Peaceful bedtime with kids.
Peaceful bedtime with kids. Oh, yes, please. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old right there with you. Is peaceful bedtime with kids a behavior?
No. It's an outcome.
Great. It's an outcome. So I'm going to ask each person to look at what they wrote on their Post-it, including you, see if we can rewrite or try again. Is what you wrote on your Post-it a behavior? Who else wants to share? Uh-huh.
I want my daughter to eat less sugar.
I want my daughter to eat less sugar. Good. What else? That's a behavior. What else? Yep.
I want my son to have more empathy.
I want my son to have more empathy. Is that a behavior?
No.
Okay. Let's try to rewrite. Yeah. What? Who else? Yep.
I want my son to stop responding to me with negativity.
Ooh. Okay, so let me help you out there. I want my son to stop responding to me with negativity. What does he do or say?
He's learned that.
Okay. 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 Great. What if we rewrote it and it said, I want my son to stop rolling his eyes at me when I speak? Do you see the difference there? Right? We can observe, we can measure eye rolling. It's harder to observe and measure negativity. It's possible, but it's harder. Okay. Peaceful bedtime with kids. I want to come back to you, sir, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Where'd we go? Where'd we go with our rewrite?
Follow instructions.
I want my kids to follow instructions at bedtime. Can you give me an example of what that means?
Brush your teeth. That's verbatim. And much nicer than when it's at the house.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want my children to brush their teeth at bedtime. Much better. Who else? Anybody else want to share? We can work with that. That's a behavior. Yeah, brushing your teeth is a behavior. Okay, good. So you get the idea here, right? So in my work, in this work, one of the biggest mistakes we see, and I made this mistake a million times, and sometimes I still do. When we're talking about behavior, you have to talk about something that is an action, that is a verb, that you can see, that you can measure, right? I want my husband to be more fit. That is not a behavior. I want my husband to go running once a week after work. That's a behavior. Do you see? Okay, so how do we use this equation? How do we use this framework, right? So, and I promise this is all going to come back to you at work. I promise. So here's what I'm going to do now. So now you're going to need take that Post-it and put it aside. Now, let's imagine your cell phone rings and you don't answer it. Your cell phone rings and you don't answer it. One reason per Post-it. I just want you to generate as many reasons that you can think of as to why you don't answer the phone. Okay? One reason per Post-it. So, I didn't hear it. Right? That might be one thing you write down on your Post-it. And I'm going to just give you about 2 minutes. Your cell phone rings and you don't answer it. Why didn't you answer it? All right. What are some reasons? Shout them out. Driving. I was driving. What else?
In a movie.
You're watching a movie.
I already know why they're calling.
You already know why they're calling. Does that mean you don't want to talk to them? Okay. Yeah, you know who's calling. What else? It's not important. What else?
Not in my contacts.
Not in my contacts.
I'm exercising and I can't breathe.
I'm exercising and I can't breathe. I heard it. Text me instead.
With my kids.
I'm with my kids.
They might never hang up.
You have a low battery. You have a low battery. Good.
Don't feel like talking.
You don't want to talk.
I don't have time for a long
I
conversation.
don't have time. Good.
On the other line.
I'm on the other line. Good, 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 good. So, one of the ways that I love to use this equation and love to use this framework is to understand why something isn't happening. So we're going to bring this back to your kids. When you design a behavior, when you design for brushing your teeth at night, what we say in our lab is that you always want to work backwards. So you start with the trigger, then you move on to the ability, and then you get to the motivation. And the reason is, anybody want to guess why we move backwards as behavior designers when we do this? You're not allowed to answer. Huh?
Reward system on that trigger.
Okay, reward system on the trigger, but it really has to do with the fact that triggers are easy to design and motivation is harder to design, and then ability is somewhere in the middle of easy and hard. So a trigger is the thing in your environment. It's the cue, it's the prompt in your world that says, do it now, right? So examples of triggers in our environment: a stoplight, a growling stomach, a memory, physical pain, smelling coffee on the corner. Those are all examples of things that say, do it now, okay? And one of the mantras that comes out of BJ's lab is, put hot triggers in the path of motivated people. So when I'm premenstrual and I see the commercials of the little kittens that are starving and, you know, the nonprofits that take care of animals, I donate like $1,000. Not really, but actually I think right after I had my second kid, I wrote a check for $1,000 to a charity one night at like 3 a.m, and my husband was like, what did you do? I was like, ah! Right, so, but that was an example of there was a trigger in the path of a very motivated person, right? So always start with designing the trigger. So when we talk about kids brushing their teeth at night, they are young enough that they don't have the internal trigger built into their system yet. They haven't developed that habit yet. It is our job to help them develop that habit. So since they don't internally have a trigger that tells me, oh, this is when I'm supposed to brush my teeth because I'm about to go to bed, we have to design external triggers for them. So maybe you're not screaming loud enough. Or maybe the step stool that they have to get on to reach the sink isn't high enough. Or maybe they don't like, I don't know, maybe they don't see the toothpaste. You know, we could go on and on and on about ways to design a trigger. And you have to try lots of different triggers before you find the one that works. And by the way, triggers have a novelty effect. So a lot of times when a trigger works, 2 days later it doesn't work. A month later it doesn't work because you've kind of gotten bored of that and your brain's like, oh yeah, I know I'm supposed to blah, 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 but I'm not going to. Okay, we exhaust triggers. Once we've exhausted our trigger design, we move on to ability factors. We have to enable the behavior. Ability factors are things like time, money, physical effort, cognitive load, right? I work at a diabetes technology company. In our medical device space, we are now in the land of algorithm-enabled systems, which is really exciting. And every time I attempt to learn the algorithm, my brain just goes like, I can't. It's really hard for me to wrap my head around it. So I have to find other ways to understand it when I'm using the system. So is it too hard for them to brush their teeth, right? Does it have something to do with how much time it takes? Or again, physical effort, are they not able to reach the toothpaste, right? There's another ability factor called social deviance. If it's outside of my social norm, I'm not gonna be enabled. And once we've exhausted triggers and ability factors, then we get to motivation. Motivation is hope, fear, pleasure, pain, social acceptance, and social rejection, right? Kind of hard to design. There are brands that do it very, very well, as we all know, right? But motivation is really hard to design. So as you sit around and think about the person in your life who you want to wave the wand and they end up doing this behavior, and you look at the behavior, take a moment right now and use this equation and think to yourself, why isn't this person doing this behavior? why can't we get my daughter to eat less sugar? Right? So this is a great equation for not only figuring out 1, 2, 3, how to design for a behavior, but then if the behavior's not happening, why isn't it happening? This framework is a diagnostic tool for why the behavior isn't happening. So in the big picture, if you're not innovating at your company, if you're not, implementing an innovation strategy plan, those are big things, right? Implementing a strategic plan is a big behavior. If the behaviors at your office aren't happening the way you want them to, why not? Now, it was mentioned earlier, and one thing that is not represented in this equation that I want to talk about. Oh, right, sorry. Somebody was talking about columns earlier. Was it you guys? Yep, talking about columns. Columns are great, right? So all the reasons why the behavior isn't happening. And this is what the framework looks like in action, right? So let me just explain this. So a behavior happens when motivation, ability, and trigger all converge in the same moment. When somebody is highly motivated, it's easy to get them to do something that's hard to do. When somebody has no motivation, we hope that they'll do something that's very easy to do, right? So as you think about this person in your life, how motivated are they? Since motivation is harder to design for and control, how motivated are they? If they are not at all motivated, we have to ask them to do something that's really easy. Eat one less lollipop tomorrow. That's it. I'm not saying you can't eat lollipops, just one less. Have a half of a muffin instead of the whole muffin, right? So thinking about where they are with their motivation levels. So one thing we haven't talked about that isn't represented here and has already been mentioned is rewards and reinforcement. Has anybody ever heard of the hook model? Nir Eyal's work on how to design habit-forming technology. He has a great book, totally recommend reading it. He's one of my colleagues from Stanford. It's not worth going into this whole model right now, but as you can see, he uses the FOG behavior model in his framework. And the part that I want to talk about right now that's relevant to you guys is this part. How do we reward a behavior? And in his work, Nir says that there are 3 effective ways to reward a human behavior. One is through rewards of the tribe, another is rewards of the hunt, and the third is rewards of the self. Reward of the self is mastery, right? I got good at it, or I want to get good at it, or I want to figure this out, or I want to try this to see if I'm good at it, right? I did a lot of research last year with people who do yoga, and learned that a big thing that kept them coming back to their practice, coming back to the mat, was their desire to master a pose, for example. That was a big, big way that they felt rewarded when they did their practice. Rewards of the hunt means you discovered something, you found something out, you learned something new, you found or discovered something you didn't know before, right? So that's where you are rewarded because you're like, oh, I figured it out. If I ever learn the algorithm, I'll be psyched. I'll be like, oh, I finally learned it, right? And it'll make me want to learn more. And then this is the easy one, rewards of the tribe, social, right? Your friends, your family, your colleagues, people around you, they reward you. They make you feel good. You feel rewarded because you're a part of the tribe, because you're a part of the group, because you feel a part of the clan, okay? So I want to offer up BJ's model, right, the FOG model. Behavior is motivation plus ability plus trigger, with a word of caution, which is, and you have to reward the behavior when it happens. So if we go back to your kids brushing their teeth, we need to celebrate that when it happens. We need to make a big deal of that when it happens as we help them establish an ongoing behavioral pattern, right? A one-time behavior, maybe if you're voting, but a one-time behavior isn't that useful with what we're talking about. If what we really want to do is practice like a startup founder, if what we really want to do is find opportunities to take some risks, if really what we want to do is try to generate some change in our organization, we have to start small, take baby steps, figure out exactly what behavior we want to design for, and then when that happens, we need to reward that behavior. Now, if any one of those things that I just mentioned isn't on the paper, isn't a part of your plan, something somewhere is not going to happen, right? So it has to be a behavior, right? We have to reward it. And it has to be small. I just want to tell you a quick story because it's so easy to say like, oh, it's so hard, change is so hard, and transformation is so hard, and I don't think that's true. And a lot of people can share stories like this. When I was still living back in New York, so this is now in 2008, 2009, I'd finished my doctorate at Columbia. I was taking all the best behavioral science, all the best research that academia had to produce along the lines of how humans do their health behaviors, and I was translating it to my full-time job, which was to design behavior change programs to deliver through email and the internet, and they were all failing. Every one of my designs, every single one of my programs, they weren't getting the engagement that we thought they would, and I couldn't figure out why. So I quit my job. And for 1 year, I just practiced as a behavioral scientist. I practiced as a health coach. I linked up with doctors' offices that specialized in working with people with pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Diabetes as a disease is so fascinating and a never-ending journey for a behavioral scientist because we can reverse that disease through behaviors. So this is an example of one of my clients who I worked with, and her name is B. And I just want to offer up rewards in action. Remember I said tribe, hunt, self. So when she and I started together, we started in March. She was incredibly obese, had every comorbidity you could imagine. She was a breast cancer survivor. She was depressed. She had chronic pain. She was on a lot of meds, totally sedentary, and was told she better do something or she was going to flare up with type 2 diabetes and not have that much longer to live. So we started working together on her behavior change plan, and I'll never forget that one of the very first things we did, the reason I mentioned the muffin is because she ate a blueberry muffin every day for lunch. It was like her favorite thing to do, and it took a month, but we got it from one muffin to a half of a muffin. Right? So you get the idea of how we approach this. This was a couple months into us working together. This is when she finished her first 5K. By herself, and she was really proud of herself. And this is a mastery moment. This is a reward of the self moment when you realize, I can do this. I got this. I can do this. So I started with her in March, and she could barely walk a mile, and on November 1st, she completed the New York City Marathon. She reversed all of her health disease. She gave up 50% of her meds. If we want to talk outcomes, this is what her biometric changes looked like over about 7 months, because we were measuring everything under the sun you could measure. Her body weight went from 222 to 178. Her body fat went from 47% to 34%. Her waist circumference went from 44 inches to 35 inches. Her average fasting blood glucose went from 105 to 94. Her triglycerides went from 84 to 55. Her resting heart rate went from 75 to 61 beats per minute, and this one is my favorite data point as a scientist. Her resting metabolic rate went from 1,200 to 1,800. Does everybody know what resting metabolic rate is? It's the number of calories your body needs just to sustain, right? That means her metabolism just went, that was in 7 months, right? So behavior change, we know we can do this. We know we can do this. If you want to see the big changes at your organization that we've heard about today, as one individual person, the question is how to start. And the one thing I'm going to say is the reason this worked with her and what you all need, whether you think it or not, is you have to feel safe. You and your teammates, you have to feel safe to try this one behavior. You are a successful executive. You do what you do very well for a reason, to to start taking risks, to start doing things that are purpose-driven and not profit-driven, to go back to the beginning, why would you do that? Why would you do that? It's a risk. So if you want to try this, if you want to try to implement one behavior and put one behavior into practice, you've got to create a safe environment. B, she never would have done that if we hadn't created a safety net, if we didn't do what we had to do to make her feel safe. And that's true for anybody who goes through change. Gotta feel safe. So now I want you to go back to your Post-its, one clean Post-it, and I want you to write down one behavior that you're going to try when you get back to work. I don't care what it is. I do care that it's small, and that you want to do it. One behavior that you're going to practice when you get back to work. Now, it could be a new behavior, could be something you've done before but you haven't done in a very long time. And I want you to take this Post-it and I want you to put it somewhere in your work environment where you can see it every day. So it can trigger you. But so that you can remind yourself that this is what I want to try. If every day you're attempting the behavior and it's not happening, why not? Use the FOG behavior model to figure out why not. When you do the behavior at your work on a given day, do you reward yourself somehow? Or do you need to ask somebody else to reward you? That's okay. Somebody else can reward you. But remember, you have to feel safe. You have to have a safe space, somewhere safe, somehow feel safe to do this behavior. It should be social, meaning you shouldn't be the only person on the face of the planet that knows you're doing this. And you got to go slow. You got to go really, really slow. I think one thing that today is reminding me of, and that something we don't talk enough about, is this takes time. This takes time. B's story is an extreme example. She's kind of like the folks who participate right in The Biggest Loser or something like that, where she was retired and she didn't go to work and she had resources and she was able to assemble a team to help her get her health back on track. But even with that, it took 9 months. It took 9 months of diligent practice, 5 to 7 days a week. It takes time, so go slow. And practice, right? Slow, tiny, small baby steps to practice one behavior. Normally when I have this conversation, I follow up with the group in 2 or 3 weeks and say, how's it going? Any guesses as to what sort of responses I usually get? Haven't had time. Number one response, bullshit. Time is a constant. It's what you make it. Carve it out. You already know that's probably going to happen. Don't let it happen. That's why we start small. I want to brush my teeth at night. What does that take? 15 seconds? Thank you. Questions? Anybody? I'll be here for about a half an hour or so.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
It seems to me, especially when you're making kids, there's a fine line between rewards and bribery.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, when it comes to kids, there's a fine line between reward and bribery. I'm fine with blurring that line, and I'll tell you why. They're so young, they haven't had a chance to develop internally habits, right? Especially the little ones. And when you say, I'll give you a lollipop if you go pee-pee on the potty, is that bribery or reward? What they perceive as a reward is up to them and is always changing, right? And so The definition of a reward is something that immediately follows a behavior and makes you feel good. That's the definition of a reward. Now, with adults, rewards have been proven to be most effective when they're variable, right? So not the exact same reward every single time. Does that answer your question? Other questions? Is it joining curves so you don't have to see yourself working out? Do you see what I mean? And so all of us, all of us need psychological safety. That's just a human need, flat and simple. And if somebody's not doing a behavior, by nature, innovative business practices are risky. So if we know that a behavior that we want to practice is risky by nature, how can we create some kind of... Yeah.
I don't understand why that's such a...
Thank you for that. Yep, thank you for that. So I didn't take a lot of time to talk about safety. Not about this is the safety for your teeth, but how do you create a context in an environment in which you can feel safe to practice the behavior. So if you're somebody who really wants to start going to the gym, but you're embarrassed when you go to the gym, what can buffer that embarrassment for you? Is it bringing your friends or your partner? Is it going to the gym at 5 a.m. when the fewest number of other people are going to be there? Is it going to, what's the name of the gym that doesn't have mirrors? It starts with a C. Anybody? Curves. Is it joining curves so you don't have to see yourself working out? Do you see what I mean? And so all of us need psychological safety. That's just a human need, flat and simple. And if somebody is not doing a behavior, by nature, innovative business practices are risky. So if we know that a behavior that we want to practice is risky by nature, how can we create some kind of safety? How can we insulate ourselves so that as we practice that behavior, it's okay to be a little risky? This is kind of a crazy example, but Adam will smile. We have a really good friend who's an entrepreneur named Raman Bastani. And he tells this story that about 10 or so years ago, he lives in Los Angeles, he's single, he was dating, and he met this girl at a party. And they went back to his place and they started fooling around and things were going really, really well. And then all of a sudden she kind of stopped and she pulled back. And she could sense his hesitancy and she was like, "What's wrong? Like, is everything okay?" And then she was like, "Oh my God, you don't have an STD, do you?" And he said, "No, but I'm afraid you might." And she slapped him across the face and she grabbed her bag and she stormed out. And he sat there and he said, "There's gotta be an easier way to go about having this conversation." And he started what's now is one of the most successful startup companies in the world of sexual health. It's called Healthvana. Is that their name these days? Healthvana. And they have inserted themselves into primary care and testing clinics all around the United States to provide free and anonymous STD testing, but they give you your results right away over your phone. Because it used to be that when you had to go get STD testing, it took 2 weeks to get your results. No news is good news. People were walking around even after getting tested, not knowing whether or not they had an STD or not, right? And so what he was looking to create at the end of the day, what he was looking to create was some way so that the casual, you don't know somebody very well, but you're going to get physically intimate and sexual with them, to create some safety around that interaction. So they have this really funny tagline, "I'll show you yours if you show me mine," and they mean their STD results, right? Because they have this really funky thing on the mobile that "Hi, I've been tested and I'm STD free." Crazy analogy. That wasn't the greatest analogy, but
He's happily married now.
Yes, he is. That's right. He's happily married now, for what it's worth in that story. But he was, for a long time, he was the most eligible person, apparently, in Los Angeles to date, because he used to run around to every STD clinic and get tested every day as a part of his startup. And so he's like, "I'm STD free." But what I mean by safety is, if you want to practice a behavior at your company, do you have to have a sit-down conversation with your boss about it and say, "Hey, I want to try this thing. Give me like a month. I'm going to practice a little bit each day or whatever. Here's why I want to try it." Do you have to get permission from somebody to feel safe? Does that make sense? Does that clarify a little bit? So one of the biggest reasons we fail in taking risky behaviors over time is because we're afraid. We don't have the psychological safety that we need to do it. Did you have a question? Oh, did somebody else have a, yep.
So somewhere it was about safety, but I think that example brings to light this idea that sometimes safety and
share a little bit more about Bee's journey, for example, and how you helped her feel safe?
Yeah.
And also be social about the transformation that she
Yeah, thank you for that. So one of the things that ended up happening right at the beginning of her journey is that she was a mother to 5 grown children and a grandmother to 9 grandchildren. She cared a lot about her family. She was a divorcee, so she lived alone. But it turned out that her family was her greatest support and her greatest enemy, like so many families are. And so when it came to the reasons that she was struggling to get healthy, her family played a really big role in that. And so they couldn't be the people to help her get healthy. And so when I came on board as her coach, we talked about that. We talked about how I could be sort of the social buffer in between her and her family, and that she could talk to me, she could tell me things, we could explore things together that felt too scary to talk to her family about. The other thing that very quickly came out of that was that she needed somebody who wasn't her coach and who wasn't her family, so she recruited one of her best friends to be her walking partner, right? And so that's what I mean by social support and enlisting social to kind of be that vehicle that can provide the psychological safety that you need. Again, so many reasons healthy behaviors don't happen is because we don't feel safe enough to try them or to practice them. I think I'm out of time, yeah? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Steph.